Unlike Ehrman, some do not come right out and say this, but instead will look at the evidence for the resurrection, but still judge their final conclusion, while including the prior probability and background knowledge of people rising from the dead, and say the prior probability of a resurrection happening is so low, since they don't happen regularly, that no amount of evidence can overcome that. This essentially suffers from the same circular conclusions we just went over. But if this was true, that the prior probability plays such a high role in determining how likely an event is, then we should conclude that any event in history that occurred just once never has enough evidence to back a warranted belief it happened. Why? Because if an event occurs only once, it has a low prior probability of it taking place, and therefore every event that happened just once probably did not happen, regardless of how much evidence we currently have for it actually happening. For example, take the event of Hannibal crossing the Alps with elephants. Such an event did not happen prior, and it hasn't happened since. We don't know how Hannibal was able to do this, or even which path he took. It is actually quite miraculous that he was even able to do it without modern technology. But does the fact that no one ever completed it prior mean it did not happen with Hannibal? Of course not, and we have sufficient historical evidence that it did occur, which is even less evidence than the resurrection has, since with Hannibal, all we have is much later Roman sources. The fact that an event only happened once doesn't create a serious background knowledge problem for the actual evidence given for a single unique event, if the evidence is sufficient to account for it. In other words, background knowledge cannot be used automatically to say the evidence can never be adequate. I've argued the evidence for the resurrection can overcome the background knowledge, and there is no reason to think it cannot. Why would the background knowledge be too powerful to overcome? I see no reason why it is. Second, the background knowledge is not simply the amount of resurrections that have happened, but should also include if God exists and is able to perform miracles. If these things are true, the background knowledge for the resurrection is not as low as some have suggested.